And then they use all that fake environmentalism to block out real environmental action, real environmental controls like genetic engineering and things that are truly dangerous, nanotech, CERN reactors, superconducting super colliders, a lot of these super advanced technologies. The Pentagon admits they're messing around with antimatter. That's in the San Francisco Chronicle. Oh, let's not have any real controls on stuff that really is dangerous. Let's just, hey, you're for the future. You're for renewable energy. You know, you care, don't you? We're going to go out to break with Obama. I'm going to come back and comment on what he had to say and finish up on the other side. Stay with us. Back to Obama.
By pursuing comprehensive legislation to transform to a clean energy economy. These mitigation actions are ambitious, and we are taking them not simply to meet global responsibilities. We are convinced, as some of you may be convinced, that changing the way we produce and use energy is essential to America's economic future, that it will create millions of new jobs, power new industries, keep us competitive, and spark new innovation. We're convinced, for our own self-interest, that the way we use energy, changing it to a more efficient fashion, is essential to our national security because it helps to reduce our dependence on foreign oil and helps us deal with some of the dangers posed by climate change. So I want this plenary session to understand America is going to continue on this course of action.
Word for word says what Lord Christopher Monckton yesterday on this radio show said he would say. Word for word. When I watched this live early this morning, my mouth was hanging open. I mean, word for word. We must do this. It's a historic global agreement. You're part of this. Your children are watching. You've got to do this. We've had all these years of inaction, which isn't true. They're taking over the counties and cities through the bureaucracies of all the nations, including the United States especially. All the different sub-regions, depending on how governments break that down in their federal systems, they are already implementing all this. You know about all the green taxes you're already paying. None of it's green. It's a robbery. So let's go back to Obama as he says, we've got to do this. It's historical. And then he goes on to say, even if you don't sign on, the U.S. is going to fund this. And that will just be private money to the IMF to go into round 2 of paying off other countries that they've already got under debt. This is their new way to get even more debt and more control. Here's Obama.
To mitigate our emissions and to move towards a clean energy economy, no matter what happens here in Copenhagen, we think it is good for us as well as good for the world. But we also believe that we will all be stronger, all be safer, all be more secure if we act together.
Hit pause. So there you have it. They're going to make the climate cuts here, which is even better for them in phase 1, just like the big famous steel mill that just closed in England. The government paid them millions of pounds, millions of U.S. dollars to shut down and move to India with no emissions controls. That's environmentalism. So even if you believe that polar bears can't swim and that carbon dioxide that plants breathe is a deadly poison, this is going to produce more of that deadly poison. Here it is.
That's why it is in our mutual interest to achieve a global accord in which we agree to certain steps and to hold each other accountable to certain commitments. After months of talk, after 2 weeks of negotiations, after innumerable side meetings, bilateral meetings, endless hours of discussion among negotiators, I believe that the pieces of that accord should now be clear. First, all major economies must put forward decisive national actions that will reduce their emissions and begin to turn the corner on climate change.
Hit pause. Even if you believe the UN's own cook numbers, all of our evil carbon dioxide may increase the temperature by 1 degree and may make the seas rise between 7 and 20 inches. Nothing. And that's been proven to be a fraud. The seas are actually slightly dropping right now, and you can just go to any major coastal relay center online and read their 10-year numbers on the level. Last 5 years, San Francisco's water level's gone down by a few inches on average, but it goes up and down. The point here is that he's saying we've got to have these global emissions controls. All nations must implement this under this international agreement. And then now we have the agreement. It's a tax on all financial transactions and a global authority over travel. This is a control grid. Back to Obama.
I'm pleased that many of us have already done so. Almost all of the major economies have put forward legitimate targets, significant targets, ambitious targets. And I'm confident that America will fulfill the commitments that we have made, cutting our emissions in the range of 17% by 2020 and by more than 80% by 2050 in line with final legislation. Second, we must have a mechanism to review whether we are keeping our commitments and exchange this information in a transparent manner.
Hit pause. That's the global government. Just like they attack your country if you try to build your own nuclear reactors or if you try to have your own central bank, they will attack you over your carbon emissions. They will put sanctions on you and then, yes, physically attack you. Physically attack you. That's what this global government is. That's why it says global governance in these treaties. I have the treaty right here. Framework Convention on Climate Change. Global governance, as they've stated. Back to him.
These measures need not be intrusive or infringe upon sovereignty. They must, however, ensure that an accord is credible and that we're living up to our mutual obligations. Without such accountability, any agreement would be empty words on a page. I don't know how you have an international agreement where we all are not sharing information and ensuring that we are meeting our commitments.
Hit pause. And that was a satellite blip from recording it, a TV blip from Denmark. We didn't edit anything. When you can read the transcript for yourself. And there he's saying you've got to have a global institution to enforce this agreement. Back to it.
That doesn't make sense. It would be a hollow victory. Number three, we must have financing that helps developing countries adapt, particularly the least developed and most vulnerable to climate change. America will be a part of a fast start funding that will ramp up to $10 billion by 2012.
Okay, stop right there. They say they're going to help the third world. All these are IMF World Bank loans backed up with Western tax money. And the loans are given, this was going on in 73 under State Department Memorandum 200, where Kissinger's talking about we give them loans to sterilize their women and to cut off food. And in the future, you won't get loans unless you cut the amount of food you eat. This is eugenics. This is population reduction. Let's go back to the video.
Hillary Clinton, my Secretary of State, made it clear that we will engage in a global effort to mobilize $100 billion in financing by 2020, if, and only if, it is part of a broader accord that I've just described.
All right, pause again. What he's saying there is, I'll give $100 billion to the third world, but we'll do it in 2020, 10 years after we're taxing you for carbon. Do you understand what that means? All right, let's go ahead now and go back to the clip.
Mitigation, transparency, financing. It's a clear formula, one that embraces the principle of common but differentiated responses and respective capabilities. And it adds up to a significant accord, one that takes us farther than we have ever gone before as an international community. I just want to say to this plenary session that we are running short on time. And at this point, the question is whether we will move forward together or split apart. Whether we prefer posturing to action. I'm sure that many consider this an imperfect framework that I just described. No country will that it wants. There are those developing countries that want aid with no strings attached and no obligations with respect to transparency. They think that the most advanced nations should pay a higher price. I understand that. There are those advanced nations who think that developing countries...
Okay, that's another lie. We've got the Copenhagen Treaty. They're upset because they were told they didn't have to make cuts, and the first world did, that they were going to get tax money. Now they learn they have to make cuts almost double.